So as I mentioned, this is our third presentation in the City of Creeks Learning Series. We're talking about the stream functional pyramid, the physical, chemical, and biological processes or layers of that pyramid. Andrew Clamann and I will be presenting today. I want to thank you everybody who helped us with content, particularly Brent and Andrew, but also people who shared photos of that we could use in the presentation to make it more awesome. We had a couple of presentations about the stream functional pyramid. We already covered hydrology, hydraulics, and geomorphology, kind of what we talk about as the drivers of stream function and the way we understand watershed function. Today, I'm going to be talking about the physical-chemical layer, and Andrew will be speaking about biology. And we look at these two layers more as the response levels, and they are responding to all the things that are going on the foundation of this pyramid. And we use physical, chemical, and biological parameters to measure as indicators of stream health. I want to retake a little bit of the previous presentation by Shash and Lindsay on this concept of connectivity in our streams. Our streams are connected in more than one dimension, and this is an important concept. They are connected laterally from the center of the channel all the way to upland, riparian and upland, and a lot of the processes that happen there are responding along gradients of concentration of nutrients, gradients of moisture. So an important concept to keep in mind. Our creeks are also connected vertically from the atmosphere all the way to the sediment and below ground. And one component that is really important in that concept of vertical connectivity is the hyporheic zone. And that is that layer of sand and gravel where sometimes the creeks look like they don't have any flow, but there is flow going through that bed material. And it is an important refuge for organisms, biological processes, and chemical processes. So a really important component of that vertical connectivity. And also the part of the vertical connectivity is how much groundwater interacts with the channel up and down. The other connectivity dimension is temporal. We live in an area that is boom and bust, famine and feast, moving from droughts that are extended, super hostile, to floods that are hostile as well and stressful for our stream function. But that's not the only temporal change. We also have a pretty wide change in temperature over time. Super hot summers, but then all of a sudden we get these pulses in the winter. Organisms respond and are adapted to these temporal changes, and Andrew's going to go over that as well. And the last dimension that we're going to talk about, or that I'm reiterating, is this connectivity longitudinally, all the way from headwaters to the bottom, the mouth of our streams. And things happen in a gradient there, accumulation of nutrients, biological processes, what organisms are adapted to those conditions. Diving into a little bit of the chemistry, one of the components that is really important is carbon. Carbon is the backbone of all life as far as we know it. It makes our cells. That's how biomass is built. That's how bodies are built. That's how energy moves, and it's packaged from organisms. So understanding the dynamics of carbon, it's really important. The streams have these cyclical processes of carbon. So our streams get carbon in more than one form. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolves in our streams, and it's uptaken by plants, by algae, and that carbon with energy from the sun through the process of photosynthesis, they build biomass. They grow, they reproduce. Some of that biomass gets shed as they die. Some of that biomass gets consumed by organisms like animals, herbivores, and bacteria. Those animals then get eaten by other animals through the food web. Those carbon molecules, as they get consumed, some of that gets released back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, and then it keeps moving through the through the food chain. Some of that organic carbon also drops into the sediment. Sometimes it gets buried, sometimes it gets processed and also releases carbon dioxide if there is oxygen. If there is no oxygen, some of that carbon gets released as methane, which are two elements that to keep in mind: carbon dioxide and methane as part of our conversation about climate change. Some of the sediment, as the carbon gets loaded there and gets buried under sediment loads, acts as carbon sink. So our aquatic systems can be an important carbon sink. The concept of connectivity, I mentioned that we had this vertical connection, all of atmospheric carbon all the way to sediment and back. We have temporal connectivity, how it cycles within the system. We have longitudinal connectivity, the carbon that goes from upstream all the way to downstream as the flow moves. And we have lateral connectivity. Leaves from trees next to the channel as they drop are part of the food source of our systems, and that carbon gets cycled as well. The other chemical important component of our streams are nutrients. That's what powers the ability of cells to do things, not in terms of energy, but in materials. And this cycle is about nitrogen, but phosphorus also cycles through the system. Nitrogen is what makes one of the important components of proteins and DNA and RNA. So cells really need that. And plants particularly, like, they rely a lot of the nitrogen to build their enzymes so they can do photosynthesis. So they need a lot of nitrogen. We do too that when we take protein shakes and things like that. Nitrogen gets incorporated into streams by many, many mechanisms. I'm not going to go into details of that. Just to mention that the forms of nitrogen that are in the atmosphere, some of that, the most abundant one, is actually biologically impossible to use unless a very specific process called nitrogen fixation takes place. So nitrogen in many systems, in many aquatic systems, used to be a kind of a limiting factor because it's really hard and energy expensive to fix that nitrogen. Once that nitrogen is made available in different forms like ammonia, ammonium, and nitrous oxides and nitrates, they react, the plants can take it, the bacteria can take it, cyanobacteria do photosynthesis, and just like carbon, go move through the biomass chain. Animals and plants, as they shed body parts and they get consumed and decomposed, some of that waste products also releases back some of those biologically active nitrogen that can continue cycling through the system. Some of that material gets buried and acts as sink as well. One component of the stream function is the microbial community. They are involved in decomposition and modifying from one form of nitrogen to another in the absence of oxygen. And if carbon is present, a really important process takes place, which is called denitrification, which part of that denitrification releases back nitrogen into the atmosphere in an unusable form. Not all of it, but some of it. It also produces oxides. And that is a net loss. The N2 is actually a net loss of nitrogen from our system. So that is a really important component where we're thinking the function of our watersheds. A lot of the changes that have happened historically by humans in our watersheds have increased the amount of nitrogen that goes in. Fertilizer, for example, in our agricultural lands and our lawns, it's an added input of nitrogen. Same for sewage. There is added inputs of nitrogen. So more food. And one would think, okay, there's more nutrients, that ought to be good, right? We have more growth, more productivity because plants are growing, that they need that for their photosynthesis. And if they are doing more photosynthesis, they would produce more oxygen. That ought to be good. And we need to think of what's the counterpart of that is all that growth and excess organic matter. Some of that dies. When it dies, it decomposes, and to decompose all that organic material, the microbial community uses oxygen, and taking all that oxygen, you deplete the oxygen in the water column, and that leads to what we call hypoxic or anoxic, low or no oxygen conditions, and things like fish kills. So excess nutrients, just like excess sugar, not a good thing if it's in excess. Because we recognize as a department that nitrogen excess is a problem, and it's not just nitrogen, it's phosphorus, as I mentioned, as the two main nutrient problematics. One of the things we do as a department is require or build water quality ponds so that they intercept that lateral supply of nutrients to our streams and retains and process some of that. Not all of our water quality ponds do. Water quality ponds that are based on filtration don't do a whole lot on nutrients, but wet ponds do. They capture and process and retain the nitrogen and the phosphorus. In order for those water quality ponds to function, we need them to be designed properly. So we have teams that are checking that those ponds are designed properly. And we also need to make sure that they are functioning properly. So we have teams that inspect and make sure those ponds are operating, because we rely a lot on them functioning properly to protect our streams from excess nutrients. Another chemical that I wanted to, chemical component of our streams that I wanted to mention, and is really crucial for aquatic organisms, is oxygen. Oxygen really drives a lot of the ability of our cells to function. We extract energy from fuel, glucose, and sugars because there is oxygen there. And oxygen is fully available in the atmosphere, but in aquatic systems, it really, really is limited, particularly depending on how much photosynthesis takes place. Photosynthesis produces oxygen, but also on temperature. If the streams are warm, they cannot hold onto that oxygen and organisms are stressed. That is why we need healthy streams. We need streams that are complex, that have fast-moving water to aerate that water and have more oxygen in there. We need shaded streams that stay cooler, so that water doesn't warm up and cannot hold oxygen. So it's really important to have healthy streams, complex, with all these bed materials, so they're not blasting all those riffles and gravel. We also have that shade from riparian areas, and that is one of the reasons why messing up with the channel and building simplified channels just to get rid of the water really fast compromises water quality. And because we understand the importance of protecting our streams, we do have policies, particularly that look at that cross-lateral connectivity of on our streams. We have creek buffers, we have protection for headwaters. We understand that longitudinal connectivity. We have many policies in place that protect that, because we understand how lateral and longitudinal connectivity do determine a lot of our stream health. I'm going now to let Andrew take over. Sorry, Andrew, I just went through your first slide.
So I get the pleasure of presenting the fifth and final tier at the top of this ecological layer cake. It was my major as an undergrad and my first true love. It's the study of all things icky, sticky, and smelly, sometimes hiding, sometimes biting, sometimes photosynthesizing. They are constantly consuming and bathrooming. I give you biology, the ultimate response variable. So how do you monitor this ultimate response variable? One way you can do it is through rapid biological assessments. You can study different layers of biology. You can do animals, plants, algae. In this case, what we're seeing here is that we're capturing a representative sample of the benthic macroinvertebrate community in a creek using a Serber sampler. When you take that sample, then we extract just the target species that we want. We put back all the fish and tadpoles and stuff. We just want the invertebrates. And then we take them back to the lab and we identify and enumerate the community. And this can be very tricky because there are hundreds and hundreds of different taxa that could be in these samples. Sometimes one little sample of 3 square feet in a creek could have easily over 1,000 individuals composing of 30, 40, sometimes up to 50 taxa. That'd be a pretty good stream, though. And of course, they're called macroinvertebrates, but some of the features that we use to identify them as unique taxa are micro characteristics. And so we have to use a pretty good microscope, not a telescope. So we do this annually. This is a video, of what you might see. Here in the middle, this little squiggly guy, that is a beetle larvae, and he's reaching around trying to grab everything he can. He's a top predator. Most of these are predators, actually. This is a water bug. He's a predator. These are large mayflies. There's snails moving around. This is taken out of a response to a person who said that mosquitoes were in their creek. And actually, I didn't find a single mosquito in that area. It's probably because there's so many predators. So what we do is annually we go to all the creeks in Austin. We have checkups to all these creeks every 2 years. We look at a lot of things, not just the bug community. We look at aesthetics. We look at physical habitat assessments. We measure stream discharge, and we do bioassessments for the bugs, and we do bioassessments for the algae. In fact, the person in the forefront, I think that's Katie, is scraping some periphyton off of rocks so we can have the diatoms community assessed. So once you know the composition of a particular community, then you can assess its health. And I use my little finger quoting marks for health there. The classic hallmark for good biology of a community is diversity. The more things you have, more complex your system, the better. This could be diversity of fish. This could be diversity of plants. It could be diversity of invertebrates, algae, and protists, fungus, you name it. What we're going to look at today primarily is just the community of invertebrates because I find them the most fascinating. But of course, the plants and the algae and the fish all work together in these really complex food webs. And then food webs is kind of that thing. We're using the bugs as a canary in the coal mine here to just assess a part of the community. But of course, they all work together in these food webs. And we're all taught that as kids with this little cartoon. You've got the producers on the bottom, the plants and the microorganisms. They're being eaten by smaller things, and then larger things eat those, and then everything else gets either eaten, beaten, or killed for amusement by humans. In this case, the decomposers are supposed to get the last laugh, but I guess the humans eat and kill those too, just for giggles. This is really an understatement and kind of an insult to the word food web. A food web is incredibly complex. Some like direct things, this eats this, but other and indirect things. When this eats this and poops this, then something eats that poop. This is a simplified food web. Let me underscore that. This is a simplified food web of the Atlantic cod. The cod being in the middle, it's showing what eats it, and then all the domino effects of these things. People wonder about an endangered species going extinct. Why would we care if a single salamander goes extinct? Well, it's all connected, folks. Laterally, vertically, temporally, longitudinally. To distill that complexity, though, we put organisms into groups by their functional feeding abilities. Here on the top left, we've got a type of caddisfly that makes a little case out of snail shells and hides its little tummy in there. These shredders will take coarse particulate organic matter, CPOM, that's like leaves and sticks and small things, and they'll chew them up and shred them and use them. And then the little bits that they're putting out in the other fine organic particular matter is vacuumed up by the collector gatherers. This is a grass shrimp. I don't know how many of you knew we actually have shrimp in our creeks, in our bigger creeks, in our lakes, little grass shrimp, little invisible clear shrimp. And then, of course, the predators are sitting around ambushing and zooming in and killing all the other guys. This particular one here, this is a damselfly. I always love this kind of juxtaposition of this delicate, fragile, peaceful, angelic-looking damselfly. As a nymph, it's a terrifying monster with these big raptorial jaws and hairs that all help it grab things, bring it back to its face, and eat it. Two more categories in the functional group are the scraper grazers. These are things like snails that they slowly glide along substrates and lick off things like diatoms and periphyton and algae and other organic matter. This one I always like to akin to a giant Zamboni that's like a cow Zamboni. The snails are cow Zambonis. And the one on the right is a black fly larvae. And these things have these exquisite fans, which are actually its modified lips. So imagine your lips reaching out into these huge fans, facing them into the flow of the river. And every time you catch something in those fans, you grab that fan back to your mouth and stuff it in your mouth, and your lips go back out again to grab things. So they're filtering things out of the water column. Another way we can assess the community is we look at which creatures are tolerant to pollution and which creatures are intolerant to pollution. And when I say tolerant, I mean like to bad conditions. The creek goes dry, the creek gets polluted, the creek gets overheated, there's no dissolved oxygen, there's no food left, etc. Some of these creatures have adaptations to just deal with that. They don't just perish along with the bad conditions. Most of the beetles and the true bugs can actually just kind of fly away when things get dry, or if there's no oxygen, or if the food's all gone. They just open their elytra, fold their bottom wings, and fly away. Other creatures don't really care much about dissolved oxygen at all because they can just breathe atmospheric air. The diving beetles grab these two little air bubbles or above underneath them or behind them and basically just use it as a little scuba tank and swim around carrying their air with them, replenishing it when they need to. The true flies on the right, this is a rat-tailed maggot, love the name, and a mosquito have these respiratory siphons that go up and with a hydrofuge break the meniscus of the water, open up and breathe atmospheric air. Little snorkels on their bum-bums. The midge, some of the midges called bloodworms. The reason why they're so red like blood is because they contain hemoglobin in them, the molecule with iron in it that helps them keep oxygen in the blood, take it out of the water, just like you and me. Intolerant taxa often have beautiful gills to extract the dissolved oxygen out of the water. They're elegant, they're fragile, they wave in the water. The stonefly, its gills are kind of up and around its abdomen. It's kind of like armpit gills, little fingers sticking out. The damselfly has 3 feather-like gills on the outside, and the mayfly has a series of gills along its abdomen. It really dresses up the keister of a mayfly. Life cycle adaptations. In addition to structural adaptations, a lot of these creatures have adapted their life cycles to deal with particularly our climate, Central Texas, but really any climate. In this case, I've got a really small beaded mayfly. They're little tiny things. They shoot off like little firecrackers when you disturb them. They're tiny, and these things can reproduce really, really fast. In fact, you might have several generations just within 1 year. And that's good because if your entire habitat goes dry in August, but then it's replenished in September, October, you might want to start your life cycle over again. See if you can get in a quick life cycle, lay some more eggs to overwinter so that you'll be ready for early spring when you can have a life cycle before the beginning of summer. On the other hand, you've got the burrowing mayflies, the long mayflies. And again, notice these beautiful gills. They wave like grass in the wind, like tall wheatgrass in the wind. These guys have their eggs in the mud over winter. They come out, they crawl around in the sediments, feeding, and they all emerge in mass, like many thousands and thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, together all at the same time. And that's why you see sometimes you go to lakes, Lake Austin, Decker, Ladybird, and there's just these mayflies everywhere drooping off the trees, making the trees' limbs heavy with so many mayflies. They're everywhere. And then they lay their eggs really quickly. In fact, some of them don't even get a chance to actually lay the eggs. They basically just die, fall in the water, and their eggs fall out of them as they decay. And really quick at one point, but then long throughout the year. Long-lived taxa, though, they need stability. This one on the left, this really cool creature with calligraphy tattoo on its head, this is a Dobson fly. Some people call them hellgrammites as larvae. And they get large. This is the male with the big tusks. The female looks just like this, except for as an adult, she's got the same kind of tusks, mandibles. These guys take 2 years, sometimes 3 if things are slow around here. I'm sure it's probably just 2 because we have a nice warm cycle. 2 years in the water. And these dragonflies, sometimes 2, 3, there are species that take up to 5 years as nymphs. That means they have to have reliable water. They can't go dry. They need perennial. They need good water quality too. So long-lived species are larger and more generalist, but they need our help. I just wanted to show you a video of a Dobson fly. I just picked him up, and now he's looking for a place to hide. They like to hide underneath rocks and dangle their jaws down and eat things like fish and other bugs. And the one on the right, the photo on the right here, I've got in the pan already for picking. We don't need to kill these because we know what they are. We usually return these. Notice the gills underneath the abdomen floating out like little plumes. So intolerant species, sometimes they're also very specific in their habitat needs, kind of like the whole golden cheek warbler needs a specific type of thing and nesting materials in a specific location. A lot of these caddisflies have very picky habitat needs. This one, Helicopsyche, makes a little helical snail-like shell in which to live in out of sand grains. This next one, Protoptilla, takes even bigger ones. This is a tiny little creature hoisting around these big pebbles. It became like you and me using boulders, and it builds itself this almost turtle shell where its head sticks out the front and its bottom can stick out the back. Looks like a little turtle shell, although for you and me it'd be a turtle shell the size of a car. And this one, I think my favorite, Phyloicus, it uses leaves that are partially decayed already. So it finds like a sycamore leaf or a cottonmore leaf that's been sitting in the stream for a long time to where it starts getting brown and falling apart. And it chops out these perfect circles and then sews them together and make these little overlapping nests. Sometimes you'll see a leaf in the water will have like a little hole punch taken out of it. That could be Phyloicus if you're at a spring, because they really only like very stable temperatures, cool temperatures, spring-fed in shallow waters. We only see these a couple places like Bull Creek. These life cycle adaptations and structural adaptations have evolved to our natural abusive kind of area where we have extremes, historically droughts, historic floods, temperature swings back and forth. It was 30 degrees on Monday. Now it's 85 degrees on Friday. They can deal with that. That's okay. What they can't really deal with is what we've done, this kind of atrocity that we've done to the hydrograph, where it's always extreme drought or extreme flood, or the water quality is always pretty poor. And that brings us back to our shared mission. It's our collective jobs. The inspection team kind of sees boots on the ground, the things that are going wrong, and tries to address those. Other teams try to resolve these problems. and then they monitor again, and or plan out what is a better solution to this, what is better criteria, and then we monitor, and you kind of have that feedback loop. We'd like to enhance that feedback loop as we move forward on hearing back from the on the ground to try to get the solutions. And then when all else fails, of course, you just need an ambulance sometimes to come and pick you up out of the creek and set things right again. So props to our spills team. The executive summary here really is just the pyramid again. Biological complexity is what we want. And you can only have that if you're supported by a good physical-chemical integrity, the water quality that they're having to deal with day in and day out. And that's only supported by geomorphological stability, the erosion and stuff. You want different habitats and complexity without too many catastrophic problems. And you can't have that unless you have your hydrologic regime under control and the hydraulics that move them. That said, I'm just going to open up the floor to any questions.
Ingrid has a question. It says, I'm curious how invertebrates function can be utilized like plants in a disturbed ecosystem.
So basically, I'm just wondering, I'm a plant person, and I think about utilizing prairie grasses and various ponds through the biofiltration, like we talked about the beginning of the presentation. So I'm just wondering, you talked about certain invertebrates breaking up some particulates into smaller pieces, which can then be eaten by other ones. Are there ways that invertebrate populations are brought into a system to do some kind of this and that not fixing? We're playing God, I know, but curious about that.
You can talk about the mussels, Andrew.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I suppose there are some times you can attempt to do that. Freshwater mussels, the livers of the rivers, they are filterers. They basically take in gallons and gallons of water, filter out the stuff they want, sequester some of the stuff they don't want, like metals and other nasty stuff, and then they put out a cleaner water on the other side. I mean, you could do that in a weird way, but you're really at the mercy of the other levels of that pyramid. Being on the top pyramid, you can't just drop it in and expect it to survive if it doesn't have the support from all those other levels. So it's really hard to play God with that biology part of it. Now, sometimes we accidentally do that, right? Zebra mussels, for example. When you get a general species that survives really well without our help, then you can have a species proliferate and do something you didn't want it to. So can you tinker with things? Yeah. Is it easy to do? No. I actually thought you were going to ask a question about using plants in the same kind of categorization to put plants someplace that do things like stabilization, switchgrass and other plants that have really deep roots. Their adaptations or characteristics, you can put those there. So we can tinker. It's just if the cradle isn't there for it to hold it, and it won't work. Cool question. Some things, I want to go back to Ingrid real quick. Some things like freshwater mussels. There's a freshwater mussel called the giant floater. It's this really big, light, fragile thing, and I've seen those in just the most disgusting stock ponds in West Texas you could possibly imagine. Just like it's 50% cow poop, and the giant floaters seem to do all right. And there's a couple other mussels that are tough like that, and those are doing some work. And I think that you could take some general species that don't seem to have too many problems and get some of those started in our ponds. It's possible.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I like genetically modified bacteria and messing with those. I in research, and so seems like there's an interesting frontier, I think, as Mateo said.
Now we're talking serious tinkering.
Yeah.
I want to just mention that who was there? That Mateo mentioned beavers, which is not an invertebrate, but it is one of those ideas of introducing the organisms that do some of the work, like the engineering work. We rely quite a bit of plants restoration. Beavers have been used in certain areas for helping reestablish connection with the floodplain and bring back a lot of the ecological function of streams. That would be a really fun and an interesting project to try and pilot.
Well, I saw Sarah had a quick request. We just talk about freshwater jellyfish for a second. I mentioned earlier that we have shrimp in our creeks, and a lot of people are surprised that we have shrimp, bona fide little shrimpy shrimps. Yes, we do in the Austin area in Central Texas, and actually all around the entire world. It's kind of ubiquitous distribution, except for the really cold climates. We do have a freshwater jellyfish. I'm totally blanking on the name. It's about the size of a dime, if not much smaller. The dime is kind of the largest it would get, just maybe half a centimeter or so. And they look exactly like you'd expect them to look, just little circles with a cross and little pulsating jellyfish. We pretty much I've only seen those in Dead Man's Hole, and I think someone's mentioned McKinney and a couple other weird places. I don't think we've ever picked one up in our sampling over the last 25 years of riffles or anything like that. But I think those are brought in. I think they're Asian in original origin and distribution, been distributed around the world. But they stick to themselves. They're not invasive. They're pretty cool. I don't know much more about them, to tell you the truth, except for they're eating little protists like other jellyfish might.
My knowledge of them is basically that they have very specific habitat, kind of water quality, transparency requirements. You see them in these kettle kind of pools that you like. Hamilton Pool is a really classic. Dead Man's Hole. These systems where you have a small drainage area draining into a pretty large, clear, deep pool. They tend to like those that kind of a habitat. I've never seen them, like Andrew said, in any of our kind of flowing creek systems, but I wouldn't be surprised if they pop up once in a while. Again, they like clear water.
Jessica's asking, what was the most challenging question that we had in the previous, and what was the response?
So
that is a challenging question,
it is.
Jessica.
Thank you for your challenge. So I don't know what it was for others. For me, though, it was a question about the water quality ponds, saying, like, what is the most important thing about the water quality ponds? And then, basically it's like, well, the water quality pond, if you have a water quality pond, what that means is you've already got this really horribly degraded system already. And yes, they are helping the environment, but really, I mean, ultimately, ponds is just a Band-Aid. What we really want to do is we want to stop applying the fertilizers that are getting there, stop applying all the auto drool, the brake dust, the oils, the petroleum, the antifreeze, all that crap. You want to stop getting all of the things that are making us need this pond. So yes, the ponds are good. Yes, they're doing some of their job. They're really doing more to sequester large particulates and stuff like that. They can't really keep everything out. Much of that stuff flows through the system. So it's better than nothing. It's a good filter, but it's not making, super clean water on the other side, other end. So they are working. They're working hard, and they're doing their job. But ultimately, I would like to see a future where we didn't need the ponds because we didn't put the stuff in the landscape in the first place. Reduce. Stop being so greedy. Stop being so consumey.
Thank you, Andrew. And there's a question from Ingrid Tower, like, does water quality ponds means constructed wetlands? And I would have to say one of our water quality ponds, the wet ponds, is the one that is the closest to a wetland system. There is still quite a bit of a difference because of the maintenance requirements to a true wetland, but they are the ones that are the closest to constructed wetlands. Most of our water quality ponds don't rely on filtration as a mechanism to grab most of the pollutants. Sedimentation filtration ponds only do filtration, so any nutrients or dissolved pollutants go through and they end up in our creeks unless they are adhered to the stuff that gets filtered. Biofiltration ponds theoretically do a little bit of better job on processing some of that nutrients. It really depends on how much the plants can uptake. The biological activity and the microbial activity can uptake those nutrients to really fully move them away of the water column. There is some evidence that they don't do a great deal of nutrient retention on nitrogen particularly, which is dissolved. They do a little bit of a better job with phosphorus because phosphorus is attached to the sediment. So not all water quality ponds are constructed wetlands. A few look like the wet ponds.
We talked about the biology in our waterways as being indicators of water quality. And in some extreme cases, there can also be indicators of illicit discharges or pollution events. Like, for example, when there's a fish kill, applied watershed research and water quality compliance will often work together to investigate what happened. Why did these fish die? Sometimes we find a smoking gun, evidence of a pollutant discharge, and other times we don't. So I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit more. I remember years ago investigating that impounded section of Slaughter Creek in Mary Moore Seawright Park. Dozens and dozens of fish, all different sizes, just died off. And there was no indication of anything entering the water that could have caused that, like a introduction of a toxic material. So we chalked it up in our final report as kind of they died of natural causes, but I'm wondering if we can explore that a little bit more. And natural is kind of a funny word, but is that still something that we would associate with this creek being in an urban environment, or is it truly something that could happen just about anywhere?
I went out with Ryan on that one. I think what they had was I can't remember. Ryan, also the other Ryan Berkey looked at those fish. I can't remember if they were shad or something else, but I believe it was the impoundment keeping them from moving around. They had a big breeding cycle and all clumped up at the end of the dam. It was hypoxic. I don't think there was a spill happening, but Ryan Hebrink, I remember going out with you, and I think Ryan Berkey, if he's here, went out and ID'd those fish. But that's a thing that does happen in some impounded streams. I can't remember if it was gizzard shad or something else.
So let's think about it, right? An impounded stream, you're making the waters moving more slowly. You may have additional nutrients and perhaps additional nitrogen in the system. You may have more algal growth, and then decay and deposition and decomposition, as we've been talking. So there might have been that the oxygen just dropped. Might be a warm day. And oxygen drop. So there are natural causes that could have made that happen, but I'm just hypothesizing here.
I think, as I recall, those shad were also maximum size. They were also the biggest one and the biggest version of themselves. And it could have been that they were all going back, trying to get back to a lake where they like to do all their spawning and stuff. So here they are, they're all piling up behind a dam. They can't get downstream, beating themselves to death, and then dying, kind of like a reverse salmon.
And Thane just added here that you seem hypoxic natural fish kills all the time, and also temperature drops can kill fish. And this is one really important thing to consider. There is thermal shocks that happen in urbanization. We get pulses of warm water after a storm that could, if you ever had move fish from one side to the other, keeping care of the temperature is really important. So it may be also related to temperature shifts. Thank you so much, Thane, for that. So we're out of time. I just want to make sure to be respectful of your time's allocation. Thank you, everybody, for coming in and participating and asking questions. And I love you all. And be ready for the next one.